A bride-to-be whose dream day shatters when she discovers her fiancé Aiden's hidden messages to his ex, Mira. Every photo of her in the wedding dress is shadowed by his longing for the one that got away, while his sudden disappearance to comfort Mira unravels years of lies. As Sophia confronts Aiden, she uncovers a web of betrayal. A condom in the trash, a cat he claimed to hate, and a whispered, "You're so beautiful." I woke up in the middle of the night, craving a look at the photos my fiancé had taken of me trying on wedding dresses earlier that day. But after I unlocked his phone, my heart sank at a message on the screen. "Mira, I'm getting married. It's been 7 years. I guess it's time to let go." I couldn't help but think, what if it were you standing there with me today? After spending the entire day at the bridal shop, I collapsed into bed and fell asleep almost instantly. I woke up in the middle of the night, my stomach growling loudly as I threw off the covers. The bathroom light was on, the sound of water running faintly in the background. Aiden must have woken up and decided to shower. Hungry and still half asleep, I reached for my phone and quickly ordered dumplings, our favorite late-night snack. Then, almost without thinking, I picked up Aiden's phone. I knew his password, and I wanted to see the photos he'd taken earlier when I was trying on wedding dresses. The pictures made me smile instantly. I remembered the moment I stepped out in the dress, the way he'd stared at me, his usual cool demeanor replaced with something softer, more vulnerable. He'd even teared up, whispering, "It's really happening. You're going to be my wife." My heart had swelled so much that moment. Just as I was about to put his phone down, a notification popped up. "Mira. Aiden, I'm coming back to the States." I froze. I'd never been the type to snoop, and I'd always trusted Aiden completely. But something about that message made me open it. "Aiden. Mira, I'm getting married. It's been 7 years. I guess it's time to let go." I couldn't help but think, what if it were you standing there with me today? Mira hadn't replied until now. My heart sank. The warmth from earlier replaced with a cold, heavy weight. For the past 4 years, I'd known about Aiden's ex, Mira. He rarely talked about her, but from his friends, I'd pieced together who she was. To put it simply, Mira was the unattainable love. They'd met in high school, back when Aiden wasn't the confident, successful man he was now. He was an orphan, bullied and overlooked by everyone. Mira became his light in the darkness. She helped him study, pushed him to get into the same university, and they became the kind of couple everyone admired. But right before graduation, just as Aiden was planning to propose, Mira broke up with him without explanation and went abroad. Aiden's friends sighed when they talked about it. If they hadn't broken up, Aiden would probably be a dad by now. The bathroom door creaked open, and Aiden stepped out, his hair damp, a towel slung over his shoulders. "Sophia, I'm hungry," he said softly. I held up the screen, showing him the messages. I looked up at him, silent, then turned the phone screen toward him. The usually composed Aiden faltered, his expression shifting uncomfortably. "Sophia, let me explain." I stared into his eyes, watching as he hesitated, frowned, and then quickly regained his usual calm demeanor. "It's just a misunderstanding," he said dismissively. "Mira and I are over. We're getting married. What more do you want from me?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge of frustration and disappointment. I wanted to laugh, and I did. It started as a chuckle but soon turned into something louder, more hysterical, until tears streamed down my face. Aiden misinterpreted my laughter as acceptance. "See? It's nothing. Let's just move on," he said, reaching for me. I pushed him away, wiping my tears. "We're done, Aiden." His face went pale. Then, he grabbed my wrist, his voice sharp with anger. "I'm not letting you go." I pressed my lips together. "We're getting married. You're breaking up with me over a few texts. Over nothing?" He was like a wild animal, his voice rising, his grip tightening as if he could force me to stay. I looked at him, my expression calm but laced with sarcasm. "Why not? Why should I stay with someone who's clearly still in love with someone else?" We sat in silence until he finally spoke again, his voice tired. "Sophia, stop being dramatic." Dramatic. To him, this was just me overreacting. My chest tightened, and I clutched my shirt, feeling like my heart was being ripped out. Then, his phone lit up. "Mira. Aiden, I'm at the airport. Can you come get me?" His eyes lit up at the message, and he immediately started getting dressed. "Don't go," I pleaded, my voice breaking. He gave me a look, half annoyed, half pitying. "Sophia, she's alone. I can't just leave her there." And just like that, he walked out the door, leaving me sitting there, feeling like a discarded doll. By 9 a.m. the next morning, he still hadn't come back. However, I saw a post from Benjamin, Aiden's best friend, on social media. "Welcome back, Mira." The photo showed a sweet-looking girl smiling next to Aiden, her fingers forming a peace sign. His expression was full of warmth. I knew then it was time to leave. When Aiden returned that afternoon, I had just finished packing. He stared at my luggage, his face darkening. Sophia, enough. I told you it's nothing. I've moved on. Why are you doing this? I looked at him calmly, unfazed by his anger. In the 5 years I'd known him, I'd rarely seen him like this. He'd always been gentle, composed, the kind of man who seemed unshakable. I'd fallen for him during a presentation in grad school. He was magnetic on stage, and I couldn't take my eyes off him. I'd pursued him relentlessly, joining every competition, every event he was part of, just to be near him. Eventually, he noticed me, but his response was always lukewarm, never a clear rejection, but never a full commitment either. Just when I was about to give up, I ran into him again. It was a rainy night, and he was crouched by the entrance of the lecture hall, soaked to the bone. He looked like a lost child, his hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes drenched. I hurried over, holding my umbrella above him. "Let me walk you back," I said, my heart aching for him. He looked up, his eyes locking with mine for what felt like forever. "You win," he'd said with a soft smile. "Let's be together, Sophia." My heart had soared that day. Now, standing here, I couldn't help but wonder, how could the same man who'd once looked at me like that have changed so much? "What about Mira?" I asked, my voice steady. He froze, his jaw tightening. "We need to talk about this later. Just, stay calm." I didn't argue. I just picked up my suitcase and walked out. The next day, I realized I'd left an important necklace at the apartment. When I returned, I rang the doorbell, and a woman's voice called out from inside. Mira opened the door, wearing an apron and a bright smile. Her curly hair was tied back, and she had a warmth about her that made her seem like she belonged there. I'd known we'd meet eventually, but I never expected it to be so soon. "Sophia, right? Aiden said you might stop by. I'm just cooking. Stay for lunch?" I blinked, taken aback. She sounded like the lady of the house. Aiden appeared behind her, his hair damp from a shower. "Sophia, I didn't expect you so soon," he said, his tone awkward. He glanced at Mira, then back at me. "Mira just got back, and she hasn't found a place yet. I thought it'd be okay if she stayed here temporarily." Mira smiled apologetically. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You're not," I said flatly. "We've already broken up." Myra's eyes flickered with understanding, but Aiden's expression tightened. I walked past them to the storage cabinet, retrieving my necklace. As I closed the door, I glanced at the trash can nearby. My heart sank. Inside were 2 things. A photo of us, torn in half, and a used condom. I remembered the first night we moved in together. I'd asked him if there would ever be anyone else. He'd kissed my neck and whispered, "There's only ever been you, Sophia, and there always will be." I wanted to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come out. How could someone change so quickly? Or maybe he hadn't changed at all. Maybe this was who he'd always been. Behind me, Aiden appeared, his face tense. He reached for my arm. "Sophia, let me explain." I turned and slapped him, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Shut up." I grabbed my things and headed for the door. Mira was there, holding a plate of food. "Stay for lunch," she said softly, her smile warm. I met her gaze, my lips curling into a bitter smile. "No, thanks. Invite me to the wedding instead." As I left, I glanced back at Aiden, his hand pressed to his cheek. He was just an ordinary man, after all. When I got home, my family was waiting in the living room. My dad threw a slipper at my feet. "You're throwing away a good man over nothing? What's wrong with you?" He was furious, his chest heaving. My stepmother, Grace Cooper, tried to calm him down. "Listen to her, honey. She must have her reasons," she said gently. "What reasons? Aiden's a great guy. He's helped us so much. You're throwing away a gem." I stood there, silent, until my dad finally sighed. "Sophia, you need someone to take care of you. Aiden's a good man. He's already called us to explain. It was just a few texts and helping his ex. That's not a big deal, is it?" "Dad," I said, my voice hoarse. They slept together. The room went silent. My dad slumped back onto the couch, his face pale. That bastard." The next day, I went to the pet store to bring Duke home. Duke was the little white dog Aiden and I had adopted together 2 years ago. He'd been sick recently, so we'd left him at the vet. If we were done, Duke was coming with me. Men were replaceable. Dogs were not. Before I left, I got a friend request from Mira. I accepted without hesitation and checked her profile. Her posts were set to 3 days visible, and the latest one was a photo of Aiden holding a white cat with a hurt leg. The caption read, "Poor kitty, from today you're part of our family." My heart twisted. I'd always wanted a cat, a fluffy white Persian with emerald eyes. But Aiden hated cats. He'd been scratched as a kid and refused to have anything to do with them. So we'd gotten Duke instead. I gave the post a like, then called a ride to the pet hospital. When I got there, a tall, broad-shouldered man was at the front desk. There was something familiar about him. He turned at the sound of the door. "Hi, how can I help?" "Sophia, Henry, you're back?" I stared at him, shocked. It was my high school deskmate. Henry Lawson had a sharp, angular face that gave off a cool, unapproachable vibe, until he spoke. Then, he was like a gentle breeze, warm and inviting. He smiled softly, his voice low and smooth. "Long time no see, Sophia." He disappeared into the back and returned with Duke, who wagged his tail furiously at the sight of me. I couldn't help but think, dogs are better than men. At least they're happy to see you. "How about coffee?" Henry asked, his tone light and teasing. I nodded, and we headed to a nearby cafe with Duke in tow. "It's been years," I said, stirring my coffee. "Last time I saw you was after our final exams. You left for abroad without even leaving me your number." Henry raised an eyebrow. "I did leave it. On the first page of your biology textbook. Guess you never checked." My face flushed. I'd completely forgotten about that. He chuckled. "I waited years for you to add me, you know." I quickly pulled out my phone and added him, laughing nervously. We talked about our lives since high school. Henry had studied abroad and become a veterinarian, working with an international organization. He'd recently returned home and opened a pet clinic with a friend. I told him about my job and my recent breakup, skimming over the details. "Why'd you become a vet?" I asked. "I remember you never talked about that back then." He shrugged, smirking. "Someone once told me it was cool. I guess I wanted to see if she was right." My heart skipped a beat. I'd been the one to say that. I never thought he'd actually take it to heart. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been the one to suggest it, but I'd long since abandoned that dream. After graduation, I'd pushed it aside, buried under the weight of societal expectations, and settled into a mundane office job. I forced a bitter smile, shaking my head at the absurdity of it all. Suddenly, a commotion caught our attention. A group of couples was playing a game in the cafe, using their noses or mouths to carry a piece of paper from one end to the other. Among them were Aiden and Mira. They won, and Mira gleefully held up a plate of strawberry pudding while Aiden smiled beside her. Then Aiden spotted me. His face darkened, and he stormed over, Mira trailing behind him. "Sophia, you're really something, huh? Dating someone else already?" He spat, his voice dripping with anger. Bystanders turned their heads, murmuring and pointing. Duke, who had been wagging its tail at first, sensed the tension and quickly jumped down, hiding behind me. Seeing my expression remain unmoved, Aiden sneered. "Sophia, are you that desperate for a man?" "We're done," I said coldly. "You don't get to control who I see." He sneered. "You didn't even wait for my agreement to break up, and now you're out here with another guy? What's the difference between this and cheating?" Henry stepped in, his tone sharp. "And what about you? You're here with your ex, playing games like a couple. Who's the real hypocrite here?" Aiden's face turned red, then pale, but he had no comeback. Without another word, Henry and I left the cafe, leaving Aiden and Mira behind. The walk was quiet, with Duke nestled in my arms, its curious eyes taking in the world around us. "Henry, do you think I did the right thing?" I asked softly, breaking the silence. He smirked, his tone light and teasing. "If you didn't think it was right, would you have done it?" I looked up at him, meeting his playful gaze. "Remember the inter-school exam in high school?" he asked, leaning casually against a lamppost. There was a question in the biology section with the wrong answer. The teacher knew it was wrong but told us to choose it anyway because we'd lose points if we didn't. I stared at him, surprised he remembered. "You stood up and asked her, just because we'd lose points. Does that make the answer right? And in the next exam, you still chose the same answer, even though it was marked wrong." He shrugged, his voice casual. "So, if you didn't think it was right, would you have done it?" I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Thank you." Over the next month, Aiden started showing up at my old workplace, waiting outside like some tragic romantic hero. I didn't know about it until I saw a post from a former coworker. "This guy is so devoted. And so handsome. I wish someone like him would wait for me." The photo showed Aiden in a black coat, staring dramatically up at the building. I rolled my eyes. "Idiot." Henry glanced at me, confused. "Not you. The idiot," I clarified, my cheeks flushing. Henry didn't press it. "Dinner tonight? There's a new place nearby. Want to try it?" "Sure," I said, my ears turning red. I tried to calm my racing heart, but then I noticed a familiar figure outside the window. It was Aiden. Henry followed my gaze. "Look, the idiot's here." I sighed. Aiden and I walked to the riverbank, a place we used to visit often. The river was the same, but everything else felt different. "Sophia, I feel empty without you. Do you understand that?" he murmured. I stared at the sky, indifferent. "What's missing?" "I don't know. I just feel like I've lost so much." Can we go back to how things were? To the mornings when you'd make breakfast, the days you'd fix my tie before work, the evenings when I'd come home to the smell of your cooking. He reached for my sleeve, his voice pleading. Please, Sophia, I can't live without you. I couldn't help but laugh. You don't miss me. You miss having a maid. His hand dropped, and he looked lost. It's not like that. I love you. I just wanted to help her. We didn't do anything wrong. Why are you ending this? I stared at him, my voice barely audible. What about the cat? He froze. Since when do you like cats? He was silent, the wind tousling his hair. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Sophia, that was in the past. But we didn't do anything else, did we? I held up my phone, showing him the photo of the trash can. He stared at it, then turned and walked away without another word. After that, he never came back. 6 months later, I was walking Duke by the river when I ran into Mira. She looked different today. Gone was the white dress that made her look like a delicate jasmine flower. Instead, she wore a bold red gown, a cigarette between her fingers. The wind caught her hair, and she looked like a striking rose. She turned, sensing my presence, and we ended up sitting on the same bench. She offered me a cigarette, but I shook my head. Mira lit hers and began to talk. She told me about her past with Aiden, how they'd studied together, dreamed together, and planned a future. It sounded like a beautiful love story at first. But then reality crept in. Her family had never approved of him. They'd gone to great lengths to keep them apart. And when her grandfather fell ill, he'd threatened to refuse treatment unless she broke up with Aiden. She couldn't bear to lose him, so she'd agreed. I left without explaining, Mira said, exhaling a plume of smoke. I didn't want him to blame himself or fight with my family. I thought it was better if he just hated me. She'd cut off all contact, except for the occasional text. Over the years, she'd watched his life from afar, like a silent observer. But then he started mentioning you, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. I knew he was moving on. When I came back after my grandfather passed, I wanted to see if there was still a chance. She looked at me, her expression softening. I'm sorry, Sophia. I glanced at Duke, who was wagging his tail at a nearby cat. Did you get the answer you were looking for? She nodded. He doesn't love me. He loves you. I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. At first, I thought he still loved me, she continued, but then one day, he called out your name by accident. After that, it kept happening. That's when I knew. He's not the same person I fell in love with. He loves you now. I shook my head. No, Mira. He doesn't love either of us. He only loves himself. Real love is about respect and honesty. It's not about control or selfishness. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the river in hues of orange and pink. Before she left, Mira turned to me with a small smile. I'm leaving soon. I don't know when we'll see each other again. She hesitated, then added, Aiden's in the hospital. He got hit by a car and broke his leg. It's kind of pathetic. Really, if you're free, maybe go see him. I shrugged. Maybe I will. However, for days, I didn't visit Aiden. I was too busy. Henry's return had reignited my passion for veterinary medicine. I'd quit my job and was studying non-stop to get certified. Then, Aiden texted me, begging me to see him. After some hesitation, I brought him a bottle of chicken soup, store-bought, of course. When I walked into his hospital room, I barely recognized him. He looked gaunt, his hair disheveled, his face pale and sickly. Sophia, he whispered weakly, his eyes lighting up when he saw the soup. You still care. You remember I love soup when I'm sick. I grabbed it from a store, I said flatly. His face fell. Sophia, maybe this is my punishment, he said, his voice trembling. Can you forgive me now? I didn't answer right away. Finally, I asked, did you ever love me? Yes, he blurted out. I've always loved you. I looked at him, my expression unreadable. Really? He hesitated, then looked away, silent. I stayed for a while, then left. Before I walked out, I said, you owe an apology to Mira, too. I didn't want to dwell on him anymore. Love, hate, it didn't matter. He was just a chapter in my life, and it was time to move on. 3 years later, we'd all moved on. Mira went abroad to pursue her dream of becoming a fashion designer. Aiden, after his accident, was left with a limp. His company went bankrupt, and he fled to the countryside to escape his debts, disappearing from public life. As for me, I'd passed my veterinary exams and became a licensed vet, and I was about to marry Henry. When I picked out my wedding dress, I chose a soft gold gown. For a moment, I was transported back to 3 years ago, when I'd tried on a similar dress. Aiden had frowned and handed me a white strapless dress instead. I don't want white, I'd complained. But he'd insisted, whispering in my ear, trust me, you'll look stunning. I'd given in, and when I stepped out in the dress, he'd stared at me, his eyes red. Do I look good? I'd asked, blushing. He'd smiled, his eyes shining as he answered, but a balloon popped, and I couldn't hear him. When I asked him to repeat it, he just nodded with a smile. It had felt off, but I'd brushed it aside. Now, I knew what he'd said. You're so beautiful, Mira.